Preparing.
We're now streaming live on YouTube. All right. Yeah, Zoom shows the meeting being live on YouTube before YouTube shows it being live on YouTube. But if you're actually watching the live stream, it turns out Zoom is correct. So
all right.
Don't know what that is, but all right. Today is May 21st. This is a design and user experience meeting for Backdrop CMS. Before we get into the agenda, let's quickly go around and say your name, where you're from, and if you have something not on the agenda you'd like to share, you can go ahead and do that. Ali, let's start with you.
All right, let's see, am I audible? Yeah, I am Luke McCormick. I am in beautiful San Ramon, California, and I'm a web product management consultant, you know, interested in all things Backdrop.
Great. Joseph, do you want to go next?
Sure, I'm Joseph Flatt from Las Vegas, Nevada, and I'm like a backend developer, I guess. I've been doing a lot of DevOps stuff the last 2 weeks though.
Cool. Peter, do you want to go next? Looks like Peter's muted, so he might not be able to introduce himself. But I think he's joining us from Australia. Not sure about that. He moves back and forth. I am Jen Lampton. I am joining us from sunny California. And we should move on to the agenda. Okay, so design, theme, user experience initiative. So for those of you who aren't following along for weekly meetings also, we did submit a handful of initiative proposals to the PMC, I believe 2 weeks ago. And I'm not sure, I'll check that issue and see how that's going, but we don't have a go button yet on that yet, a green light or anything, but we do have a good plan of things we want to do, even if it doesn't get approved as an initiative. So I think that I'm excited about it either way. One of the things that we had identified previously as being really important to making it easier for people to be able to run Backdrop without knowing how to build a custom theme was to make contrib themes better, or at least make better themes available, whether they're contrib or in core. And it's hard to make them better without knowing what you're theming for. And so we figured we could set up a better version of the style guide module that include more common elements that we could use across all themes. And so there are a handful of new issues, and that's now linked from the agenda here for the style guide, for adding common elements that we think if all themes made themselves look good on this style guide, it would get us closer to making those themes look good across all sites when people were trying them at the beginning. And so that includes things like having all 10 core layouts in there with perhaps sample content in every region, a handful of standard views examples, and just making sure that the styling for some standard elements looks good would also mean that we could set up a development site or test sites that included all of these elements that would allow people to look at themes, not necessarily on their own site, but on example sites. We have some infrastructure work to do, I think, in order to get that up and running, but we have some good opportunities now using things like Tugboat, which is what gives us our demo sandboxes on backdropcms.org. There's also a tool called ZenCI that lets us do the testing of issues in the Backdrop core queue that could also be leveraged to spin up sites on demand. So, and there's also some options for, I think Luke, you mentioned like having one site with a handful of themes on it that you could switch between rather than having one site with one theme for every theme, one site for every theme. And so I think that we've got some great options for how to move forward on that. We just need to figure out how to do it. Luke, do you have any other thoughts on the design theme initiative that aren't related to the things that I'm most excited about, so I was just talking about, that you might want to remind people of? You're muted.
All right, maybe. There's two things that come to mind. I mean, similar to the idea of having themes for use cases, having a list of use cases. It's something I've been noticing as I've been going to things like Wix and Squarespace. That there's they defined a couple of like standard things that people do with websites, and maybe we should, you know, make or have or consecrate some sort of list that has those kinds of things. The other thing that I'm not sure has been kind of talked about yet specific, I mean, it's always on our mind, but I've been thinking heavily about responsive things recently. And I wonder if besides testing different themes and, you know, having display elements for different themes, if we want to specifically guide users for how to test on different, you know, device widths, for example, or like how much of that we should be responsible for versus assuming that the builders will know to do that. You're muted, Jen.
No, I'm muted. In terms of the themes that we're providing, or in terms of people building website, like their websites on the themes afterwards, or both?
You mentioned a second ago, like the style guide, and also the sample sites. So presumably that would work. You could go to either of those on your phone or on a desktop, or we could prompt for that, or simulate it, or do something like that.
So I think we've got two problems here. One of them is like making sure these tools exist so that people can do the thing. And then the second one is making sure that information gets to the people who are building themes. And that could be like a custom theme on your own site or a theme you're contributing. Like you want to make sure you test it on mobile regardless. But if we had a style guide that included all of these common elements, we might be able to say, hey, theme developers, if you want to contribute a theme to Backdrop, we recommend you install the style guide module and then check your site on the following device widths or something like horizontal phone, vertical phone, tablet, desktop, whatever, and see if, I don't think that should necessarily be a barrier to getting a theme in, but we have some pretty clear instructions on what to do for like module development, and we do code reviews and stuff. It might be useful to do that sort of thing for a theme that's going in. So rather than being like a code review, it would be like a visual review and say like, hey, I threw a style guide module on the thing and we're now missing this view style or whatever. Right. Suggestion, you could add it, not optional, not a requirement. And I think that might help too. Like I noticed we treat theme developers as other module developers, which in most cases is good because everyone's a developer. But I think that the way that people evaluate themes is very different from the way that people evaluate modules. Most people evaluating a module will install it and use it. But people who are choosing a theme don't want to install and use it, right? They want to see it first. Yeah, so I think that we might have that just be another recommendation for people as people are submitting themes to the Backdrop contrib group. We could say, hey, if you're submitting a theme, have you used the style guide module? Does it look good on a phone? Just stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I think there's two bars. There's catching up to the competitors, to Drupal and WordPress and Adobe Experience Manager and things like that. And I think there's another bar where I think the state of the art in the world is actually pretty primitive, and we could pass them and be better than that. Totally, within I don't want to commit to that, but I mean the bar the world holds itself up to seems low enough that it could be a potential competitive advantage if we can use our things to be like, oh, by the way, watch what's easy for us to do that the other guys can't do.
I think that, so there's, in terms of like a demo site and sample stuff, I think that we can definitely do that. We can make like everything look good on a phone as you're testing it. But when people start to add their own stuff in is when it gets really hard because you sort of break free of that like example we gave you that we know works. But I think that even if we can make it look good out of the box with an example, then at least people will know that it can, and it's not the theme that's broken. Which I think is sometimes the impression you get when you try it on and you're like, oh, it doesn't work at all. And you think it's this theme doesn't work. But really, if we show you an example of the theme working, you might be able to be like, oh, if I built my view that way, I know it would look good.
Well, it's funny, just even in this brief discussion we just had now, something that you said gave me a lot more clarity on this, because you just reeled off like half a dozen different things, phone horizontal, phone vertical, iPads. I'm thinking, oh my God, we've already like soared past what any kind of tool is going to handle. And clearly it's a doc of some sort, it's recommendations. And even I would think, I would push for having like one thing, like make sure it works on desktop and phone. Like don't forget to test it on a phone.
Yeah.
And then the other ones, like while you're at it, grab the iPad, grab these different kind of phones, rotate it, like helpfully supply a list of that. But I think as a minimum, you just need to, and maybe you don't even bother, or maybe it's a phone only thing. It's not a requirement that it has to, but you should know, the consumer should know. It shouldn't be, as long as it's not forgotten about. I think we've achieved our ends. It's like translation, right? Like things don't have to be translatable, but you should know if they are.
Yeah, and I think with the core layout system being responsive out of the box, the amount of work any given theme has to do to keep that should be minimal. So I don't think it's asking a lot of people to make sure their themes look good on phones. The only way I could see that being a problem is if you're moving from something like a Drupal 7 theme that maybe already had a bunch of code in it that handled layouts and regions, and they were trying to apply that to backdrop layouts and throw out backdrops layout responsiveness and redo it. That might be a problem if that theme hadn't also been adjusted for responsiveness on Drupal 7. I would assume, though, that if these are themes that are being carried from 7 to backdrop, they probably have already solved that problem because we're used on Drupal 7 today. But you never know. There's a bunch of sites out there that still aren't responsive.
Yeah. Well, I think just knowing gets you 80% of the way there. And then once you know, if you do anything about it, I mean, that's up to you.
Yeah, that's interesting. It almost seems like, like we as like everyone in the world should assume that everything works on a phone, and that should be a safe assumption. But in reality, it's not a safe assumption. But yeah, so part of me is like, oh, maybe we should put like a checkbox somewhere where we can be like, this theme works on a whatever. But no, it should be the other way. It should be like, of course it works. And if it doesn't, there should be some way people can like flag it as being like, didn't work on my phone. I don't know.
I mean, theoretically, the state of the art has been to do mobile first since like Luke Grabowski's thing in 2013 or whatever.
Yeah.
And out of dozens of projects I've been on, I feel like I've seen that actually done maybe once.
Huh.
Yeah. Half the time there isn't even like a comp of a mobile device, right? The designer gives the comps of a desktop display and then says to the developer, and also make it mobile, please.
Yeah. Yep, I've seen that. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, as a developer, like I don't develop on a phone, I develop on a desktop. So that's what like, my instinct is like I develop the desktop first and then I add the phone. So I can see how like that's how you might think it need to render too. Like, oh, I'll just write all the code and then we'll adjust it. And when you have to do mobile first, like you have to go backwards and be like, okay, this is what I see. Now let's do it this way and take out what I see. So you're like, it's like subtractive rather than additive, which is, I think, hard for some people. But yeah, I totally understand why it might be that you don't see it mobile first very often.
So as product marketing consultant, like I'm pointing to this as a possible competitive advantage, because none of the big platforms do it either. Huh. Like if you go into Wix and Squarespace, both of which I've done recently, you design a whole site and it never mentions mobile.
Really? I thought at the end there was like a preview on my phone button.
Yeah, but that's too late.
I think they have like a you build 2 sites mode basically.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so you build your site and then you clone all your pages and then build them again for the
Whoa.
mobile version. And then you flag like this page is the mobile version of that page.
Whoa. That's crazy. That's like how we did it. You remember back when we used to have like a m.yoursite.com, like the mobile version? What was that? 2010 or something? Yeah.
Yeah, so you
Yeah,
just
I mean,
basi-
sorry.
they just check your screen size when you first load it with some JavaScript and then
Flip.
like change which content they load based on the screen size when you first load it.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's clever, but it's crazy.
Yeah, but even that's, still sucks. It's what I mean by like the rest, no one in the world actually does it well. And we've got lots of stuff to do, but heck, if we wanted to grab a competitive advantage, we could be the first to do it right. More than half of page views happen on a phone. So when you fire it up, the preview you see should be a phone. And that should be like the first thing you design out. And then like as you go, or at the end is when you like expand it to be a desktop version. But like most sites are looked at on, the internet is a phone thing. None of us website builders have acknowledged that.
The internet is a phone thing like that. Yeah, I think we have like, I don't know. So we're trying to make it so that in the theme preview or theme, I guess we call it a preview image, there's like a way you can upload like one image that represents your theme. And we're trying to change that so that instead of being a single screenshot, it's like a whole bunch of screenshots. And my hope for that is that it would be desktop, mobile, tablet, like you could have different sizes in there. I hadn't considered the preview experience also needing to happen in mobile, but I could totally see that. I mean, because our sites are responsive and you can like resize your browser and see what they'd look like, we could just put in like a little iframe and totally deliver that experience without too much work. We just need to do it. But yeah, interesting.
Can we? That would be great. So suddenly we're better than Adobe Experience Manager if we had that. So how hard is that?
I mean, I think we already have like the ability to preview content in different view modes using an iframe. Like I think that everything we need is there. It would just be to try and figure out like where that lives. Like,
Hang on, can you say that again, the last little bit?
So I'm not sure which little bit, but we already have the ability to preview like content in an iframe, and the color module stuff does it in an iframe too. So I was thinking that if we took that iframe and made it like mobile size, the site would automatically show you the mobile, like what it would look like on mobile.
Actually, that happens in the color module already.
Yeah.
Because the iframe is smaller than our desktop breakpoint most of the time.
There you go. It already starts on mobile, Luke, in some places.
No, I've actually heard this, and like I've noted to myself when in discussions, I'm like, oh wait, like like this isn't the first thing I've had this idea, but it feels like it feels like low hanging fruit. It feels like a big win relative to the effort to actually formalize it.
Yeah. So this is also leaning back towards your original recommendation, Luke, of having like one site that allows you to use something like Theme Switcher to change themes in preview, because you could have like a page that'd be like preview desktop, preview mobile, and you switch to mobile and it delivers that iframe experience, and Theme Switcher could be on that page and it would just like switch out, like here's your mobile X page on whatever, and you can navigate the whole site in the iframe. Yeah, so that could even, I don't know that if that needs to be a feature of Theme Switcher, maybe, so that if you throw that module on the site, you automatically get that experience. But that would be something that would be fairly easy to implement there. And then if we had a site with Theme Switcher on it, we can even allow people to be like, go to the themes page, install the themes you want to preview, click, click, click. Okay, go to Theme Switcher, don't change the theme, see what it looks like. Yeah,
well,
that could be killer.
I mean, like Chrome DevTools does that already, right? You can get into the thing and and preview different size mobile phones and stuff. But if it's not too hard, if it's a reasonable amount of work, it'd be really nice to have the site able to do that, and particularly since the destination viewport sizes are always much smaller than what actual developers have. We're these giant screens with 4K displays and things like that. So you could have a display that just blows up, fills your 4K display, and has all of them. Has at one time, the desktop, the mobile, and the tablet versions, all there.
Yeah, that does also assume that people previewing the themes are the developers, where I think in some cases here, the decision maker on which theme it is isn't the person who does the building. I mean, I don't know. Like, it's another thing where it's like, I don't want to preview themes and I'd like to see them that way, but am I the person who's going to use that page the most, or am I going to send my client there and be like, which one do you like the most? And then have him look at them and be like, I want this one. And they'll be like, okay, and then I'll do that. I don't know.
But I don't think the clients, that we're envisioning here would ever take it of themselves to do something like that without being carefully instructed to do so by their developer. So
that's true. Yeah,
so
even
wherever it is, they're being sent and guided and helped along by somebody who knows what's going on.
Yeah, and I think if that experience was one where like it could be, I don't know, the easiest thing to do would be have like one iframe and a little select list that's like, what size do you want it? And you can change it to whatever size you want. Having all 4 of them on the page also, if you had 4 options or whatever, seems reasonable if you had a large enough page. You could also stack them vertically if you didn't make that page responsive. Right? Yeah, okay, it seems not too hard. Luke, will you make an issue for the theme switcher module that just says something like investigate mobile previews? And I'll try and take a look at that after today's meetings.
Will do.
Okay. It sounds so reasonable. Okay, we only have a couple minutes left, so let's move on to product design. There was one issue that Peter wanted us to talk about, issue number 4408 in the core queue. The title is Show Enabled Text Filters Above Disabled Text Filters. So for those of you who are not familiar with the text filter interface, this is the thing that just got an overhaul in Backjob 116, where when you're setting up a text format, there's a whole bunch of different filters that can run on that format. They do things like wrap paragraph tags everywhere you have like a line break. They convert links or URLs into links, and they can strip out HTML tags. And the order in which those operations are performed is important, because you don't want to like strip out the anchor tag after you've just added an anchor tag for a link. So if you had those things in the wrong order, it becomes a problem. But if you have 8 available text formats, and on any given text format you only have 2 enabled, the suggestion is to move the ones that are disabled below visually and not show them in the list. And my personal feeling on this is that it's very dangerous to move the order of those items, because I wouldn't expect somebody who is enabling a text format to know in what order it should happen. And by default, they are all at the correct order. And if you change the order when you disable them, you're removing that tool from the person who has to turn them on later. I think if there was some way, we added some way that when you re-enabled them, they put that weight back. So that if they're weight, like put them below, and then when you turn them on, they put them back in the order, that would be fine. Or if there was some way where we didn't actually change the weight in configuration when they got moved, and it was just some trick visually that moved them to the end of the table, that might be a good way to do it. But I wouldn't want to like change or pull them into a different table or something. That's something that just would prevent that order from getting lost if we move them around. So I don't know, Peter, I haven't read the whole issue. I don't know if there's anything in there in particular that was discussed about how to retain that weight value. Not sure if you're even...
basically suggested what you just did, that we wouldn't want to change the weight, but like keep the weight of everything and just enabled or disabled means that they're displayed either above or below. And some of them might be JavaScript things or whatever, I'm not sure. But yeah, they don't realize it changed the way to enable something that goes back up to what it should be, and that's supposed to be the
Okay, that sounds reasonable. I've lost the link already. But yeah, I think if we move them around with JavaScript, that makes sense. Is that table not sortable? Is it like there's no table sort on there? There's, oh, no, it's just the checkboxes I'm thinking of. Remember there being something funny about that table. So that should be fine. I'll take a look at that issue later and add a comment. But yeah, it definitely, most of the interfaces we have in Backstrap core where we have items that are enabled and items that are disabled, the disabled ones fall below so that when you're reading the table top to bottom, you get the stuff you want first. So I think that makes sense. Just that particular thing that is a little funny because it is a table of information, but it also has order in it, which is unlike most of the other tables that we have information with disabled items. So just have to be done carefully. But if we can figure it out, that's also something we could apply to any future tables we might have that have disabled items with weight also. So. Let's see, back to the agenda. Design issues. I don't have anything called out here as being particularly urgent. So let's jump to open Q&A. We only have a few minutes left, but Luke, I know there was something in the beginning. You said you wanted to ask about, can you do it in 2 minutes or less? No.
Actually, I can, because it's almost like a yes or no answer.
Okay.
What I was curious about is, does Backdrop let you do this? Is there any feedback from the theme to, say, the layout manager, the layout builder for breakpoints? Is there a way to set up something in the layout manager so you can tell it, if you're on a phone, do this. If you're otherwise, do that.
So Backtrap uses the Bootstrap 4 grid system, which does all of its breakpoint management stuff with classes and CSS. And so if your theme wanted to do it differently, it could remove the CSS file that's added by core and add its own, or CSS library in our case, or it could change the classes on different elements if it just wanted them to be, 2 columns wide instead of 3 columns or 1 column or what have you. The way the themes interact with the layout system is the way that it works with every other template, in that your theme has the last say, so that everything from core and modules and whatever provides a default. Like, here's some HTML and some CSS, it's a default. And your theme gets to come and say, no, I don't want that, I'm doing my own thing, and replace it. Or it can say, actually, I'm just gonna add a little on top rather than throwing out everything that's there. And so that same pattern applies to layouts and grid systems as it does to everything else. So if you wanted to change the grid system entirely and not use Bootstrap, you can do that in the theme. If you wanted to change the breakpoints in the Bootstrap grid system, I do this a lot. You can do that in your theme by overriding a single style sheet. So it's possible to do what you're asking from a theme perspective, but there isn't like a user interface for breakpoints like there is using something like the breakpoint module in Drupal.
I want that. Another thing where I want something in the interface that you don't have to fire up a text editor and have vast amounts of knowledge to know how to use.
Yeah.
All right, but thanks for the answer.
So I think it's where we are right now. There's sort of like a halfway solution where you can add classes to things using the user interface, as long as those classes are defined to do what you want them to do in your theme. So if you have a well-documented theme, or you already understand how Bootstrap works, you can use all of the interfaces all over Backdrop to add classes. And again, those things have to work together and you have to know what classes to use where. Wes wrote a module that reads classes out of your theme's info file and puts them into the user interface for you, which is, I think, a little better because it doesn't, you don't have to know how your theme is built before you add the class. It helps you add them, which I think is better. But it is hard to get information from your theme into the system because it comes last, right? It overrides everything that's already there. So how do you put it in the beginning and say, yeah, so it's tricky.
Yeah.
I think there's been a long standing issue to allow themes to have config files so that when you enable them, it'll import a bit of config for you to like, I don't know, I guess one of the uses would be the color module, to just use config files for your color settings instead of the color.inc file.
Yeah. It's also like, there's a whole bunch of issues that are related to like importing config files, having dependencies. There's a whole bunch of stuff that has use cases in the real world, but gets really complicated when you start. You can also imagine use cases where people can get into a lot of problems. Like you wouldn't think that installing a theme might like overwrite some setting you had somewhere else. And if you allowed config import, we wouldn't have any way to control like what config is imported. People could like import anything. And same thing with dependencies. Like you could get yourself where your like theme depends on a module, which depends on a theme, which I don't know. There's like like a whole bunch of really tricky stuff. But yeah, I think all of them are valid and deserve careful consideration, but I don't have no answers to whether they're actually good ideas or not, because they're hard.
I was just picturing from the content admin perspective that it's very easy to imagine just, you know, whether they're on a phone or a computer. It's like, you know, if they're coming to get this information from my thing, if they're, you know, no matter what, we have to tell them like the thing that they're looking for. Yeah, you know, they're coming to my restaurant. They've asked to know the location of it. I got to give them the location. I got to give them that address. Now, if they happen to be on a computer, I might show them an ad for the weekly special. But if they're on a phone, I don't want to bother them with that. I just want to give them what they came for. So I'd like to try to figure out some way to put some capability to mess with that in the hands of the content creator.
Yeah, so that use case should be covered by what we have already. But you would need to know like what class to add to that block with the ad in order to make that happen.
And behind the scenes, we're sending everything to the browser, and the browser chooses to like not display large chunks of it in certain circumstances, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. All right. Let's go ahead and wrap this meeting because we have a developer meeting to jump into with a bunch of exciting news. So I'm going to go ahead and end or actually Luke is going to go ahead and end the recording.
All right, here we go. Thanks.